The film versus digital debate has been a topic of conversation that's been going on for ages. While photography elitists claim that film has a look that is unmatched, more casual shooters tend to enjoy the ease of use of digital. Film used to have many arguments explaining why it was a superior format, but because of the advancement in digital technologies, many of these arguments aren't relevant anymore. But one argument that has stood the test of time is this: the film look cannot be replicated exactly on digital. But why is that? To understand why the film look cannot be replicated exactly on digital, we need to understand how both formats work, as although both are trying to achieve the same goal, they use a completely different approach to achieve it. A film strip is made of a gelatin emulsion layer and many little tiny light-sensitive silver crystals that cover the surface. This is commonly referred to as grain. Now when it comes to color-negative film, it uses 3 layers of different colors: magenta, cyan, and yellow. So essentially, when we press the shutter, we expose light on a small 3x2 rectangle on the film strip, imprinting an image on it. After going into a development process, it becomes a negative image that needs to be flipped into a positive to create an image. As for digital, the process is much more simple. A digital sensor is made up of a grid of tiny photosites that are sensitive to light. Each photosite is usually referred to as a pixel. Each of the pixels uses 3 colors: red, green, and blue. And so, when we press the shutter, the sensor reads out the light. The digital information is then translated and processed into a digital image format and stored into your SD card. Okay, so it's understandable why digital might have some difficulties recreating the look of film, as both processes are completely different. But when it comes to the final image, there are only a couple of things that really differentiate them. The first is grain, tiny randomly generated particles that appear on each frame. It's the first thing that most people do generally associate to when it comes to the film look. As for digital, it's deemed as noise and is typically seen as more unpleasant. Then there's color rendition, or simply how the colors of the image look. Now this is a bit more complex because the difference in color rendition between film and digital can't be summed up as one thing, as both will process colors differently, whether it be in a lab or as a digital file. So we can't just say that film has a greener look, as later on we could correct the greens and it wouldn't be relevant anymore. Here I'm mostly referring to how both come out of the developing phase. Lastly, something that is much harder to recreate on digital is halation. Halation is a red glowing outline around section of high contrast and is created when light goes through the film strip and bounces back to the final strip of color, which gives it a red glow. Although many types of film strips now have anti-halation layers, there are still some types of film out there that don't have them. A good example of this is Cinestill 800T. So the saying is that we can't replicate the exact look of film on digital. But I decided to put this to the test and see, can we actually tell the difference between film and digital? So I've created 4 pairs of images that in my eyes look pretty similar. One is always film and the other is always digital. I've decided to blind test the internet to see if they could tell the difference. So I posted on r/analog on Reddit and on TikTok. After blind testing the internet and some of my friends, here were the results.
They can really pass this film. It's just that I know that one of them is digital and one of them is film, that I'm gonna find something to nitpick and like base my guess around. But if it wasn't for that knowledge, I would not be able to tell that it's one of them is digital.
Man, pour l'instant, là, si c'était des photos que je voyais sur Instagram, je ferais juste penser que c'est film, puis je me poserais pas plus de questions que ça.
Let me first start off by saying that Lightroom is a software that isn't powerful enough to actually recreate the exact look of film. Maybe there are plugins out there that can replicate the exact look of film, but Lightroom just isn't one of them. With that being said, can we get a look that is close enough? Absolutely, yes. So as we've discussed before, there are 3 distinct things that is unique to film and is hard to recreate on digital. The first is grain. The grain pattern on film is very fine and randomized, making sharp lines look unpolished. So when trying to recreate that on Lightroom on a digital photo, despite the added grain filter, it never looked the exact same. Lines always look straight on digital despite the softening of the grain. Now, when both are compressed into an Instagram format, so 1080 by 1350, now the grain patterns will look similar. which is probably why I was able to trick so many people into thinking that my digital photos were film. The second thing that is unique to film is halation. This is something that Lightroom doesn't have any tools to recreate, and this is how most people that got it right on Reddit were able to figure it out. Whilst the film photos had halation on the bright windows, the digital opted by staying green, making it untrue to the film look. Lastly is the color rendition. Let me first say that color rendition mostly comes down to who is digitalizing the photo. If we take a normal negative film strip and just invert the image, the photo comes out blue and flat. It's only when we white balance the photo and add contrast that the image actually starts looking like a true to life image. Some actually invert their images manually, others will just use a piece of software to do it for them. But this means that technically what we refer to as the film look is an inverted filter for actual film. So the colors of film mostly comes down to who is digitalizing the image. Now in my case, all these photos were sent to a professional developer and digitalized by them. So when it comes down to recreating the colors of film, here are a couple of things that I noticed. Firstly, film didn't have as many shadow details as digital, so I needed to actually remove some dynamic range in the shadows of my shots. Second is, film tends to have this green tint in the shadows. Using the green and magenta curves bar, I was able to add greens to the shadow to recreate the same look. The reds also felt much deeper and saturated compared to the digital photo. Now for all these comparisons, there wasn't a one-size-fits-all filter that made digital instantly look like film. I needed to carefully change every slider to get the colors mostly right, and even then I didn't get it perfectly. But this also shows to me that if you have similar colors to film in a compressed image, then it becomes very hard to see the difference between film and digital. I think it's safe to say that digital can create a look that is close enough to film that we can't tell the difference anymore. So why would we still want to shoot film? And for me, shooting film is more about the experience than the actual photos. Although photos on film look awesome, to a point in which digital photographers are literally trying to replicate the actual look. Shooting film for me has always given me this poetic feeling towards photography. It's the same reason why someone would go for vinyl instead of Spotify, or a Chemex versus a coffee maker. The extra steps keeps you grounded into the activity, making it more about the activity than the actual results. But I would say that it's not for everyone. Some just need the photos right away and need them to be sharp and realistic. But some like the challenge. The risk of light leaks, having a limited amount of shots, playing photography but on hardcore mode. It makes the whole experience much more rewarding, despite the fact that you end up with less overall images. So can we actually replicate the look of film on digital? Well, although there might be some plugin out there that could get it perfectly, Adobe Lightroom itself just can't get it 100% right. There are still some things like halation and grain pattern in which Lightroom can't replicate the exact same. But can we get to a point in which people can't tell the difference anymore? Well, especially if we're planning on posting on social media, most people can't tell the difference between a digital edit and actual film. But even though, film will always have this special place in my heart, as there's just something enjoyable about shooting it on film.